Potential federal funding cuts to public media entities could have widespread effects here in New Mexico. Students, faculty, and community members assembled at the University of New Mexico on Thursday for a protest. And as the UNM football team prepares for its spring game this evening, we catch up with Sean Ryder, the Journal's Lobo football beat writer, to discuss what we can expect from this team. From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Friday, April 18th, and I'll have more on those stories in a few moments, plus a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast on the other side of this break.
This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, we've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. We work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join us in our mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years.
President Donald Trump announced plans this week to cut back on federal funds for publicly funded media, prompting fear to broadcast stations like NPR and PBS. Here at home, many stations in New Mexico are also feeling a bit of unrest. With more on this, I'm now joined by the Journal's assistant business editor, Megan Gleason. Megan, thank you so much for joining me. Before we start talking about the cuts and the potential impacts of them, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of an overview of these public media entities across the state.
So New Mexico has 15 public media outlets that are eligible for community service grants through a federal agency called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is a publicly funded nonprofit that supports and promotes public broadcasting. And exactly how much funding these entities get from that agency and how dependent they are percentage-wise on it varies by outlet. For example, New Mexico PBS told me that 15 to 18% of their budget is made up of the money from the federal government, while Santa Fe Public Radio, KSFR, told me that around 40% of their money comes from the federal government. So pretty big chunks, especially for local, small stations.
And Megan, as your story outlines, federal funding is a huge part of the budgets for most of these entities and a key part of their ability to share information with the public. So any distortion or any disruption to that funding could have consequences for the way they carry out their work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of one of the goals of why the federal government has historically funded these public media stations whose mission is to inform and educate the public. And we likely would see disproportionate impacts in small and rural stations like KSFR, for example, where they're saying, we have one news reporter and we're going to have to cut back on already slimmed down news delivery that we're giving to our communities.
And Megan, as your story highlights, outside of the federal funding that these stations receive, they also can rely on community donations and things of that nature, and also grants as well. But if that federal funding gets cut, I would imagine the grant writing space becomes a lot more competitive because now you have a lot more entities competing for it.
Sure, and it can seem like a small number, right? Like with UNM, it's 11%, but that's almost $270,000. So trying to make that up with public donations or grants, that's a difficult feat, especially now in uncertain times where we're seeing a lot of New Mexicans pull back on spending as tariffs and uncertainty around the impact of that rolls out in the nation.
And Megan, obviously President Trump has said that he wants to do these funding cuts, but we're still uncertain if they will actually happen. Do we have a timeline on when we can expect a decision on the funding, if it'll be given out or not?
Yeah, so Congress is in recess right now. They come back at the end of April, and then they'll have the House and the Senate will have a 45-day window when they can either approve the funding drawbacks or they can reject it.
So the fate of federal funding for public media outlets here in New Mexico and around the country hanging in the balance as we await Congress's decision. Albuquerque Journal assistant business editor Megan Gleason with the latest. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Gino.
Students, faculty, and community members all gathered at the University of New Mexico's campus on Thursday for an organized protest. With more on this gathering and what was on the mind of those demonstrating, we now turn to the Journal's education reporter Noah Kalabak, who was at the protest. Noah, thank you so much for joining me. What can you tell us about this demonstration?
Yeah, so like a lot of universities across the country, UNM saw a National Day of Higher Education Action protest take place. And as you mentioned, a mix of community members, whether it be faculty, staff, students, alumni, just all came out there to kind of voice their opposition to changes at the federal level, how UNM is kind of dealing with those. Also, you had people protesting for the liberation of Palestine, calling on the university again to divest from companies it has connections with that might have ties to the Israeli government. So just, a mix of things, both with the new presidential administration and kind of picking up where we left off with the old one.
So Noah, it sounds like a very diverse group of individuals that were demonstrating on Thursday. You had a chance to speak to a few of them. What was on their minds?
Yeah, so I spoke with a couple students. I spoke with one freshman who was just like, hey, it's cool to see this on my college campus. Just came to check it out. Spoke with another who was told about the protest from her TAs, who are some of whom are in the graduate workers union at UNM, which is negotiating a new contract with the university. And then, I spoke with at least one alumni who was calling on the university to stand firm in its policies and not cave to federal demand.
And Noah, this demonstration comes after we've received news in recent weeks about students at universities across New Mexico, including UNM, that have had their international visas revoked. I'm curious, were any of the protesters there voicing concerns about that issue?
There were definitely calls for the university to do what it can to protect international students. Now, as we've noted, UNM has not given us a number of students, and the other New Mexico universities, that being New Mexico Tech and NMSU or New Mexico State, have. So, just repeated calls. Hey, take care of our international students. Make sure they don't, do things to commit to taking care of them. Was really the call for protesters.
And Noah, have we heard any official response from the university to this demonstration?
We did not. We sent questions over about what the impacts could be if it were to hypothetically divest, cut ties with companies that might have ties to the IDF. Also asked, well, how much federal funding is tied up, and what could the impacts of not complying with federal orders have on the university's funding? And didn't get responses on those. Did get a campus-wide letter that President Stokes wrote a week back that we included, but yeah, didn't get a response from the university on how some of these things protesters are calling for could impact the campus's financial health.
So several issues on the minds of protesters on Thursday at the University of New Mexico. Journal Education reporter Noah Kalabach with the latest. Thank you, Noah.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gino.
After an offseason of change that included a new head coach taking the helm of the program, UNM football is getting ready to kick off their spring football game this evening. It's the perfect time then to bring in Journal reporter Sean Ryder, who covers the team for the paper. Sean, thank you so much for joining me. Curious to hear what your observations are of the team and the players going into tonight's game.
Yeah, no, spring practice with a new coach, a lot of new players, new coaching staff, always exciting, always a lot to see, a lot to learn. There's a couple guys in particular I'm really interested to see today at University Stadium, and probably to just kind of start them off. I'd go with quarterback James Lobstein. He has been kind of the number one guy throughout spring after Idaho transfer Jack Lane suffered an elbow injury and has missed pretty much the entirety of spring practice at this point. Lobstein is a guy that has put himself in a good position so far to contend for maybe that starting job there in fall camp, and I think a good showing on Friday night in front of fans would probably go a little bit of a long way.
And Sean, a topic of conversation that's always going to come up anytime you're discussing college football or athletics in general is going to be NIL and the transfer portal. I'm curious, how have those two played a part in UNM's offseason so far?
Yeah, I think the notable headline from the kind of early going with the transfer portal has been the departure of Kean Need. He was a Weber State transfer, played pretty well at Weber State, and he was really kind of the starting tight end, the de facto tight end one for New Mexico throughout the spring. And this week he came to the coaching staff, or I should say last weekend, came to the coaching staff and told them, hey, I'm probably going to enter the portal. And I think so far he has an offer from BYU, but it kind of puts UNM in an interesting spot where, they've really needed to add at quarterback, wide receiver, defensive line, probably linebacker as well. And now they're going to have to add to the tight end room with only having 3 tight ends and, kind of in need of some more, true blocking tight ends.
And Sean, as we mentioned earlier in the interview, Jason Eck, the new head coach of UNM football, in his first offseason, going into his first season as head man here in Albuquerque. And it's a lot about building a team, but also about building a culture as well and building what he wants the program to be. So you've had a couple months to get to know him. You penned a profile of him when he first arrived here that gave us a little bit of his background. But what can fans really expect out of Eck?
Yeah, he's a guy that, he is competitive. He does really want to win win, and he does really want to build something here at New Mexico. But I think the main takeaway that I've seen in terms of practices and all that, he also wants it to be fun. He wants guys to have a good time, to enjoy themselves. He said it time and time again. College football is a massive investment. It is really hard to be a college football player. It is a ton of time and sweat and effort all put into it, and he does want guys to have a good time while they're doing it.
And last question for you, Sean. It has to deal with the X's and O's and what we'll see on the field. Schematically, what can we expect to see out of UNM's offense and defense?
Yeah, it's going to be a pro-style offense, so it's going to be a big departure from last year, and really, I don't want to say a huge departure from the year before, but it's going to be a straight-up pro-style offense. It's built on concepts, not individual plays. It takes time for players to kind of get into that, but they are going to run a decent bit of 12 personnel. For those listening at home, that's 2 tight ends on the field. I have seen a little bit of kind of 21 personnel, 22 personnel, which that just alludes to 2 running backs being on the field at once, given the running backs that they brought in through the transfer portal. And defensively, they're going to be a 4-2-5 base, but they want to be multiple. For those listening at home and don't know, that means 4 kind of down linemen up front, 2 linebackers, and then 5 guys in the secondary. The positions that kind of make that defense go is the jack, that's the boundary defensive end, and then the star, their nickel star, their 5th DB. They do like to play some dime, which is just 6 DBs on the field during kind of third down packages and all that too.
So the UNM football team set to take the field this evening for their spring football game, and should be exciting, Sean, to see how they continue to develop leading up to the regular season opener. Thank you so much for sharing the latest with us.
Thank you for having me, Gino.
If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today there's a 20% chance of showers after 12 p.m., mostly sunny with a high near 70. As for this evening, a 30% chance of rain showers, mainly after midnight, mostly cloudy with a low around 40. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the Leading News. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll see you again on Monday.